Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Brad Englert. Brad is an experienced author, advisor, and technologist with over 40 years of experience in the private and public sectors. He worked for Accenture for 22 years, including 10 as a partner. And then he joined the University of Texas at Austin for 8 years, including 7 years as their chief information officer. So in this, when you hear him referring to the firm or the corporate side of his work, he's referring to his 22 years at Accenture. And when he refers to the university, he's referring to UT, the University of Texas down in Austin. Brad is the founder of Brad Englert Advisory, and he's also the author of the book Spheres of Influence: How to Create and Nurture Authentic Business Relationships, a book that offers practical guide to helping emerging and established leaders develop and perfect the critical hard skill of building effective and lasting professional relationships. And that is really what we get into in this conversation, is how do we think about and nurture our network as a professional. We talk about being a young professional. We talk about being a more established professional and even a leader within your organization. How should you think about and build your network on purpose at each of those different stages? How do you keep connected with people, add value, all that great stuff that is so important to building not only a successful career, but a rich and robust and fun career as well. I hope you enjoy it. Here is Brad Englert. Brad, welcome to the show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Exciting to jump into this topic because I think, the show is called People Business, and the world of work is all about relationships. So let's start. My first question for you is, as somebody who was in consulting, who led big technology functions, you worked in higher ed, why write a book on relationships?
Well, I enjoy helping people in their career, grow in their career. And with the firm, you were always expected to be a mentee and a mentor all the way through every year. And I enjoyed that. And at the university, I continued that tradition. And I had all these stories. And I thought, I need a better way to share these stories than 2 or 3 people a year. And that really was the genesis of putting it in a book that I could share much more widely.
That's great. And had you always wanted to write a book?
Yeah, I always enjoyed writing. At the university, I wrote a blog once a week for 8 years, and I enjoyed that. And the purpose of the blog was to, 1, not rely on the grapevine to get messages across, 2, to reinforce the values we were trying to live by, recognize staff who did a great job, and then about every 90 days apologize for something that screwed up. And
that's good too.
And just being transparent. And, my message to my staff was, it's not if things will go wrong, when they go wrong and how we deal with it. And we became much more transparent with our customers, and they appreciated that.
Yeah. And customers being who in that case?
Well, 54,000 students, 21,000 staff, and 4,000 faculty. So we affected everybody.
Yeah. Internal clients. Yeah.
That's right.
So this is going to be a big question to start here, but I think it's one a lot of people struggle with, is how to frame up or begin thinking about building a network over the course of their career. It's like, how do you find the right people? How do you know they're the right people to meet? How do you stay connected to them? How do you know when to cut them away and, not worry about them? Like, we'll unpack a lot of this, but for people who maybe are, let's say they're younger in their career, we'll just start there. Like, how should they start to think about the genesis of building a network that will then sort of carry them on through their career?
Well, I think you need to be strategic and you need to be intentional. And some of the relationships you have are just common sense. Those relationships closest to you, like your boss or direct reports, I mean, you're going to be meeting with them once a week anyhow. So why not be intentional about how you go about meeting with them? executive leaders, be prepared to work with executive leaders, and same with all your staff. So that's the internal sphere of influence, that from day one, you're interacting with these folks. And then the external sphere, people you have less direct connections with. So customers, peers and influencers, and strategic vendor partners. Now, I didn't say vendor partner, strategic vendor partners. So you don't have to meet with all your vendors, but who are you spending the most money with? Who are you depending on to help you be successful?
Yeah. So let's break that down we'll start with the internal. I know this is kind of how your book is structured too, with the internal sphere and the external sphere. So let's start with internal, because I like the way that you pointed that out. These are people you're going to be connecting with anyway.
Right.
So through the course of anyone's career, there are going to be countless people that you automatically interact with and have opportunities to build relationships with, just because every business is a people business and we're all going to be working with other people. So how do we maximize those relationships? You said be intentional. What is the difference between being intentional with the peers around you or with your boss and sort of just showing up and doing good work?
Well, when I finished the manuscript, I stepped back and just asked myself, what is common in all these relationships? And there were three principles that came out. Number one was understand their goals and aspirations. If I'm a boss, I want to share that with my direct reports. If I have direct reports, I want to know what their goals and aspirations are. So starting there. Second, set and manage expectations. So how do you agree on how you're going to work together and then manage those expectations? And then the third principle, genuinely care about their success. So I started the university and I met with this faculty member I worked with 15 years earlier, crusty 40-year faculty member. And I said, okay, give me some advice. He goes, get out of the office and let them know you give a damn. That was the best advice, because getting out of your office and meeting with your customers, your peers, your influencers, your direct reports. I would always meet with my direct reports in their office. Well, why would I do that? One, I get to walk across campus and bump into people. Two, their teams see me walking through the work site to meet with their boss. And I don't want them to come to the ivory tower and, supplicate, I want to go out there and see people, meet people. So same thing with customers. I had peers that vice president for public safety. Well, why would I meet with that person? Because we all knew it wasn't if there'd be a problem, but when there's a problem and how do we work together? So we had a bomb scare, we had a shooting, we had a murder, we had 100,000 people show up at the stadium most Saturdays in the fall. You have to prepare for that. Turns out that he went to The Ohio State University. The Ohio State University was a client of mine for 4 years, the best client ever. And we just hit it off. We had that common feeling about the university. And we just worked really well together to practice with our teams what would happen if there was a situation.
So let's go back to that person who's starting out in their career. I know that when I was starting out in my career, I've been doing sales my whole career. And so sales is inherently a selfish position, right? By default, because you're trying to get somebody to buy something from you. There's commissions on the line. Like you're thinking about building your book of business. What I have learned over the 20 something years that I've been in sales is it has to be a communal thing. It has to be about the other person.
Right.
You have to care about somebody else and their success and their well-being. But it can take time to flip that script in your head and reconcile that when you come into the workforce and you're just like, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to make a name for myself. What's my legacy going to be? And, you can be sort of very inwardly focused. How either did you or how do you recommend people shift that mindset? Because it's easier said than done to say, well, care about other people. And it's like, well, yeah, but I'm trying to climb this ladder too. And I'm trying to prove myself. And what advice do you have for people to be able to start to look outward a little bit more and care about the people around them and be thinking proactively about the people around them?
Yeah, great question. One of the reasons I wrote the book was to kind of debunk the whole Go Network story. And, it's like I've been to many networking events over the years. I did not get one customer from that. I did not get one relationship. And I got a bunch of business cards, and it's just transactional and superficial. I had one person call me a week or two later, ask for a donation to their not profit. I don't even know this person. And so if you go into it with caring about your customer versus a transaction, you're just going to be more successful. And I had this one sales team that, their transactions were high, but their turnover rate was 50%. So it was like holes in the bottom of the bucket. They're scrambling to fill the bucket instead of capping the bucket. And actually, we asked them, who are your customers? How many kids do they have? Where did they go on vacation? And then just blank stares. And
Yeah.
so we had to move that team to go out and meet your customers and understand what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
And if you can't help them, maybe you know someone who can.
Yeah. Well, so that's another question that I have too, especially for people starting out. Like, you talk about being helpful to each other and building mutually beneficial relationships. There can often be a feeling like, well, I don't know what I can give to this person. Like, if I'm not directly selling them my service, or if I'm not directly leading their HR team, or if I'm not consulting with them on XYZ, then I don't have much other value to provide.
Mm.
How do you think about providing value to the people in your network?
Well, I'll give you an example. There's a chief financial officer who had been with this is a large research one university. She'd been there for 25, 30 years, trusted, loyal employee. She helped the CFO solve problems across the university. And what I was asked to do is transform all their administrative systems. So I worked closely with her because she knew how to navigate. And she knew that if she helped me, I would help her by having a successful program. Fast forward 10 years, I'm at another research one university. I meet with the chief of staff for the CFO, and she goes, Brad, I don't think you should meet with me. I've only been here for 2 years. I'm kind of doing these goofy little projects. Don't waste your time. I thought, well, that's awesome. I won't waste my time. So you have to, understand where people are. And back to that influencers, it's not just your peers on an org chart, but there are people who could be influential, like the chief of staff in that one university, that also can help you achieve your goals and achieve their goals.
Yeah. What about outside of your direct goals? Like, did you think about that at all through the course of your career? Because, like, building relationships is a broad term. This is something that I have thought about a lot with my own career. Is like, I was one of those who was like, well, if I'm not solving this problem, I'm not really adding value. But what I realized is I read a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to a lot of podcasts. So I'm consuming a lot of educational information. I also wound up, like, I volunteer at nonprofits. I have kind of a weird eclectic network. And I found that people would appreciate me helping them solve other problems through some of those means, even if I wasn't solving the problem that was, like, my, quote unquote, my profession.
Right.
And that
Right.
there was really seemingly no difference for those people. Like, we were building great relationships through this value we were providing for each other. And we hadn't yet exchanged, again, quote unquote, business value yet.
Well, it's more fun and more rewarding to do that.
Yeah.
If you're just transaction, it's kind of boring.
Yeah. How do you, kind of another question back to the first one is, like, how do you think about or encourage people to take a longer time horizon view? Because it can feel very rushed. I just got this job. I need to make a mark. I'm a new person. I need to climb the ladder. I need to prove myself. I'm a salesperson. I need to make quota. There's like all this immediacy in the workforce. And yet compounding takes time, and relationships are one of those things
Mhm.
that can compound over time. So how do you think about balancing the need to prove yourself in the moment or get done what you were hired to do, and then also being willing to like slow down and take the time to build real relationships with people that will maybe help you 20 years down the line?
Well, the good news is it's a learned skill. You don't have to be born with ability. What I would coach my direct reports to do was to look at an organization, find out who their peers are, and then just put it on their calendar so it pops up every 4 to 6 weeks, 4 weeks if your organizations are working closely with that person, 6 weeks if not so close. And then just have those meetings pop up on your calendar, and then be intentional when you go to meet with these people and say, here are the topics I want to talk about. We're going to change all the phones on campus. We're going to change the learning management system. We're going to change the email system. We irritate everybody, really, but it will be better in the future. And I had a woman who worked for me, and I directed her to go meet with this IT manager. And she thought I was insane. She goes, "They hate us. Why would I go meet with this person?" And I said, "Well, I want them in the tent instead of outside the tent throwing rocks at us."
Yeah.
So she begrudgingly went and met with this person. And over time, as we slowly changed the culture from a fire drill heroics into a proactive, customer oriented organization, that IT manager saw us getting better and more transparent. And 9 months later, she was an advocate for us. And
Yeah.
that's, guess what? Her boss became an advocate. Now, he hated us too because of prior transgressions. There was a valid reason to not
Sure.
be happy, but we just said, give us a chance. We want to improve. They want us to get better. And, but she reminded me of that when she reviewed the manuscript. She said, "I just thought you were crazy."
Yeah. It reminds me of another conversation I listened to or interview I listened to. Part of being intentional, as you said, is being willing to go first.
Yep.
And I remember I was listening to, of all people, this was an interview with Gabby Reese, who was an Olympic volleyball player
Mm,
and won a bunch of medals. And she was just talking about relationships in general. And she was saying how one of her sort of beliefs is that she always wants to go first. And that includes smiling at somebody at the grocery store. You walk by and you're both sort of stone faced. She said, if you just smile at somebody, show them your teeth, give them a big smile, 9 times out of 10, they will smile right back. Like
mhm,
people
mhm.
want to reciprocate positive emotions,
Sure.
and emotions in general are contagious. And so if you are out there being willing to go first and face potentially that little bit of rejection, oftentimes the rejection never comes, and
Mhm.
you wind up cutting through and you realize that those people who you thought hated you were willing to engage,
Yep.
but they just, they were too uncomfortable to go first.
Mhm. I agree with that. And you had talked earlier about slowing down. You can be in such a hurry you don't have time to meet with people.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Just put it on your calendar. And so
Yeah.
all my direct reports had 7 relationships they would nurture. I had my peers across the university, 7 to 10 relationships that I nurtured. And that created this network of like 90 to 100 relationships that was like a nervous system.
Yeah.
And you would hear good, positive feedback. You'd hear negative feedback. You'd hear rumors. I had this one vice president say, "Brad, I heard a rumor that we don't have enough licenses for the students to do the training. We need license. They need to do the trainings because of our federal grants." I said, that is a great rumor. I'll go check. I'm not checked. And fortunately, when we bought the licenses, we included the student employees.
Yeah.
So I was able to respond quickly, nip it in the bud. And, because it could have been valid. And then I would have
Yeah.
solved it and not have it become a big, big problem.
That is one of the cases for being in person, at least some of the time too,
Mm-hmm.
is just those chance encounters and the ability to pick up stuff you wouldn't otherwise pick up.
That's right. That's right.
It just happened this morning
Mm.
where my wife is traveling this week and she's going to see a concert with her sister. And so I have our two boys and I'm bringing them to school and picking
Mhm.
our youngest one up from preschool in the morning.
Mm.
And as I picked him up from preschool today and was walking back home, I just heard this woman say, "Oh, Wednesday's a professional development day." And I said, "Excuse me? What was that?" And she said, "Oh yeah, there's no school on Wednesday." Well,
Mm.
I had scheduled the babysitter to come after his school. And I was
Mm.
like, well, that's going to be a problem. So I called the school, confirmed it. I came back home. Babysitter can come earlier. Problem
Mm.
solved. Everything's great.
Yep.
But if I were just operating in my own silo,
That's right.
I would not have overheard that. And there's countless cases. That's a personal example, but there's countless cases of that at work too, where somebody's working through a personal problem. They're managing their finances, right? And somebody overhears it, or somebody is just walking by and you go, "Hey, how do you think about this problem?" Or,
Mm-hmm.
"Hey," and one, you are just like able to deal with so much more and catch so much more just because you're
Mm-hmm.
in the web. And two, you're
Right.
building relationships in those cases because now I'm talking to the other mom and, "Oh, thank you. By the way, I'm O'Brien. And,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, my son's in your class with your daughter. This is great." And, now we're like that web just gets more and more enmeshed. So I'll step off this soapbox, but it just happened today that I was like,
Well, I
it's
asked
so true.
my people to have their antenna up, just be
Yeah.
be cognizant of what's going on.
The other interesting thing I heard you say there, and I want to tease this part, is it sounded like the number that you were saying that everybody kind of managed was 7 to 10 other
Yeah,
relationships, key
that's right.
relationships. Is that the magic number for you?
Yes, for the internal sphere. I think the external sphere, you could have a few more relationships because you're not meeting with them as often. So just take vendors, for example. I would be very strategic. I know where, I was spending millions of dollars and where I wasn't. So the vendors where we're investing the most, I would meet with them quarterly with the purchasing director and my person who managed vendor relationships. And we would meet quarterly and we talk about, what's going well, what could we improve on. Sometimes we're late paying our bill, it's like, I want to be a good citizen and I want them to be good. And contrast that with a vendor who is supposed to be strategic, who only showed up once a year for their check, which was always 10% more than the year before. And they just didn't care about it. And it was so evident. I hired them to fix something. They broke things that had worked. And it's like, you guys really don't care, do you? And they didn't.
Yeah.
And so we replaced that vendor. And the company that replaced the vendor had cutting edge technology, standards based technology, more secure, and they actually cared about it. And because if they could make us successful, they would be able to sell their product into all those other large research one universities. As we're going live, I got a call from this senior vice president of sales asking me how it was going. I mean, it's awesome.
Yeah.
That's customer service. He cared because if we failed, he would fail.
Yeah. So let's stay on the number for a second, because I think this is important. So we'll stick on the internal side, because I see people wind up with 20 direct reports, or they're trying to stay in touch with everybody that their department touches, and it just becomes too much. It sounds like the way you did it was almost like creating a web of connections versus you having all the connections.
Right.
So
Right.
you made sure that the connections were covered by your team, but
That's right.
it was distributed. You didn't have to manage it all yourself.
That's right. And it helped them to learn the skill and the benefits of that. we would all come back in our weekly meeting and say, what did you hear this week? What did you hear? What did you hear? And it was, instead of everyone in their silo, they had to understand what their other peers, my direct reports, were doing. So when they go out to meet with someone, they knew we were replacing 21,000 phones. It would take 6 months. It would irritate everybody, but it wasn't their area of responsibility, but they knew it was important to communicate that. So I think by them building their network, it really forced them to have a broader view of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that you say in the book too, is help other people make connections.
Mm-hmm.
So what other coaching do you give, or what does coaching look like, I guess, for your direct reports and team members who maybe aren't as natural at this? What are the lessons that you had to share the most, or coaching you had to give the most to help people develop this skill?
I had to push them to get through the inertia of not doing it. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day. I don't have enough time to meet with so-and-so. And it's like, okay, I'm not asking, it's not telling you need to meet with them. Just put it on your calendar. It's not that hard,
Yeah.
So I think I had one of my direct reports who reviewed the manuscript said, what I appreciated is often you'd slow me down, because I'd be charging ahead to solve a problem when I didn't actually know what the problem was. And I would slow them down and say, let's understand there's no rush here. It took us 40 years to get this way. What's another week? It's like,
That's a good perspective.
Yeah. And I had a direct report say, I don't think this project can be finished in the summer. And I said, it's taken us 40 years to get here. What's another 6 months? Let's do it with quality, but they had the courage to ask.
Yeah.
I think building that mental muscle that it's okay to ask. It's okay to ask your boss what they want. I have 2 phrases in the book that I noticed I used. One is, your people are not mind readers. So you need to communicate what you want. And the other phrase I use is, use your words. You have young children, I hear the whining, but I don't know what you want. So you need to use your words.
Yeah.
So I had a vendor.
It's the world I live in right now. Yeah.
And the vendor was whining and said, use your words. What do you need? And so, when you're the boss, you should, tell people what you want to do. I had one boss who prided himself as a chess master. I'm thinking 10 steps ahead. Well, guess what? Me and my peer direct reports had no clue where the guy was going. And I'd say, why don't you tell us where you're going? And then we all can help you get there. He could not do that.
Yeah.
His ego or whatever. And so we're just less productive.
Yeah. Could be ego, could also be just he didn't know how to get where he wanted to go. Yeah.
Actually, I think that's a very good observation.
Yeah. I've seen that happen too, where people who dream a little too big, it's like, that's great. What's the first step? Where are we going? What are we doing?
So I had a partner at the firm who was just brilliant, genius level. And we'd have a problem. We're working together on this big project, and he could get to A to Z in a nanosecond. And then I'd get up on the whiteboard and say, okay, A, B, C, and drag him through the whole alphabet, metaphorically. And when we got to the middle, he had a huge gap because he hadn't actually thought all the way through.
Yeah.
And together, we were the best team ever because he could get to the answer and then I'd plot him along.
Yeah.
And then we'd have the solution.
You loved the outcomes you produced together and hated the work that it took to get there.
He'd get so mad at me, he'd throw like whiteboard marker.
Yeah.
An eraser.
Yeah. I was listening to an author talk about their relationship with their editor, and it sounded very similar. Yeah. One more question on internal teams, because you talk about the importance of sharing, and this is for more managers, leaders.
You talk about the importance of sharing your values with your team, and then also the importance of understanding their values.
Right.
Can you talk more about what that actually looks like in practice? How are you doing that? What settings are you doing that in? How does this stuff come up? And what are you doing with it?
So when I joined the university, my first task was to help create an IT strategy. So I had my direct reports helping me, and we went and talked to 300 people across campus, all the deans, all the VPs, graduate students, undergraduate students, talked to staff, and we said, what do you want from the central IT group? And that's where we, together with my direct reports, we came up with values like deliver high quality services, foster customer partnerships, data driven customer focused decision making, collaboration, trust. And number one that came out of it was family first. Well, why would my central IT group, 330 people, have family first? Because I live in Austin, Texas, and we have multinational IT companies here and startups that pay a lot more than we can pay. But one thing I can promise is a solid 8-hour day. And then you go to the gym, you go home, you go read a book, go be with your family. I had a network engineer who got an offer from a startup and with equity and all that. And I said, I don't say this to everybody, but if you don't like it, you can come back. And so he went off and, they were doing his dry cleaning and feeding him. And 2 weeks later, literally 2 weeks later, we get the call. Can I come back? He took the job because he thought it'd be better for his family. But guess what? He never saw his family.
Yeah.
And so, I'll take a reduction in pay as long as I can have a life. We put those values on the website. We put the values in my blog, my weekly blog I'd talk about. We would have orientation. So not one person could get on the floor without going through orientation. Well, they tried to sneak out, I'm too busy, It's like, well, I keep a list. So HR has a list. You need to go to the next month's orientation. And we would talk about the values. And this is what the campus wants from us. And they don't want heroics and they don't want fire drills. That's what we used to do. They wanted proactive customer service with trust and collaboration. I also would have all my direct reports in the orientation. You get to meet all the leadership, and probably more importantly, I modeled those behaviors. So I remember I wrote a blog. I don't want you checking email 24 hours a day. I want you to, if you have a school play, go to the school play. You need to go to the doctor, go to the doctor. If you're sick, don't be a hero. Stay home and go on vacation. Don't put off your training, go to training. I would model that behavior. So I wouldn't respond to email 8 p.m.
Yeah.
I would not respond to email when I was on vacation. Well, why not? I think you're still working. And then whoever you put in charge is undermined. Go take it. I have to teach people how to take vacations,
Yeah. Yeah. That's still really hard for a lot of people to do.
Well, I was bad at it at the beginning. I had to learn. And so I was asked to lead this big transformation project at a client, and it was October. I said, CFO and the provost were at the faculty club having lunch, and I said, I know we can be successful. I really am looking forward to helping you. But next June, I have a trip planned to Australia. I was an exchange student in high school. It's my 25th high school reunion. I already bought the tickets and the passports for the family. It's 3 weeks in June. And they're so, yeah, no problem, no problem. So we get to April, made our first major milestone. Yay. Got to May. We're meeting with the president. I said, Mr. President, as I reminded you the last 3 months, I'm going to be going in Australia in June. And his hand starts shaking. And it's like I'm in slow motion canceling my vacation.
Yeah.
And the CFO and the provost says, Brad, wait a minute. Don't say anything. Mr. President, when Brad joined us in October, he told us about this vacation. He said Diane's going to be in charge. Says this is a good time for him to be away. We should uphold our commitment. The client defended my vacation.
That's great.
So came back. I didn't check email while I was gone, didn't check voicemail. Diane did a great job. And 10 years later, I'm in that town with my wife, and we had dinner with the CFO and his wife, and we talked about that. And he goes, Brad, we were scared to death when you're gone.
Yeah. But you got to remind people, like, the world goes on and other people are capable, and,
Right.
you know, it's like, it's okay to enjoy your life too.
But, just using your words,
Yeah.
Before I learned how to do that, I would cancel my vacation.
Yeah. Well, you talk in the book too about the importance of setting boundaries and
Yes.
and being willing to hold those boundaries with people. And I think that's critically important. Anyone who struggles with that, there's another great book out there called Essentialism. And it's basically how to do less better. The whole book is how to set boundaries. And it is a hard thing for all of us to do. And we feel like it's going to set us back in our relationships, but it actually, when done right, can enhance our relationships.
So I had this type A partner. Everything always sounded urgent with her. And I'm trying to leave one evening, have dinner with my wife, and the phone rings 5:00. It's the partner. I need white paper, all white paper. And I literally said, whoa. I didn't say no, because that'd be like setting off a rocket. I said, whoa. When do you need this white paper? Oh, let me check my calendar. I meet with the client in 2 weeks. Okay. How many pages does this white paper need to be? 3. I was thinking 10. Do you have an example of a white paper? Yeah, I asked David. I did one on XYZ Corp 10 years ago. Well, guess what? I left and went home. Now, before I learned to say whoa, I would have called my wife, canceled dinner, upsetting her and me. I would have stayed up all night. I would have delivered a 10-page paper the next day, and she would have been mad at me.
Yeah.
I mean,
How about
that's
that?
a lose-lose-lose situation.
Yeah.
And just to say whoa gives you some mental space and time, especially with someone who, everything sounds urgent. Again, that's a learned skill.
Yeah.
Just say whoa.
For sure. And it's scary at first. It's
Right.
scary at first, but it is a good muscle to flex. Just like you were talking about overcoming the inertia of getting out and seeing people.
Yeah.
Overcoming the fear of setting those boundaries, both can be transformative for you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Let's flip, if we can, to the external sphere here.
Okay.
We've talked about it a little bit, but how do you think about, in particular, you've talked about strategic vendor partners, but even beyond that, right? Like, there's a lot of value in staying connected to peers in other industries, to other networking contacts who maybe aren't specific vendors of yours, but kind of operate in the same field, know things, might add value at some point in your life. How do you stay in touch with that group differently than you do the internal group?
I like to participate in professional groups, in the IT world. Here in Austin, Texas, it's a very, very strong IT ecosystem. And we all kind of know each other. We've been here 30, 40 years. A guy that I started at the firm 40 years ago, we stayed in touch. We worked on the same project together at the Navajo Nation, believe it or not. And we've stayed. So as he grew in his career, I grew in my career. Well, we're in the same IT organization now. And he was chief information officer, very large Texas state agency. At the same time, I was the chief information officer at the university. So, and we're in the same professional organization. And, it's just fun to keep those connections, even though we're not working in the same organization. And you never know someone you might be working with now might be a customer later, might offer you a job. You just never know.
Yeah. Well, that's the value of never burning a bridge, right? Is you
Mhm.
really never know where people are going to go. I've been in my position for 15 years now, and there are companies that I talked to 15 years ago where the person hated me or said no to me or rejected me or whatever. And lo and behold, 15 years later, they go somewhere else. The opportunity is different. Their perception of me has changed.
Mhm.
I've had people then join companies that were already clients of mine. And so now, because I treated them well before, even though we
Right.
didn't work together, now they're giving me a shot at retaining the business because
Mhm.
they're coming into my client. So you just never know what that web is going to look like down the
Right.
road. And it is, yeah, I've learned that lesson. You just can never burn a bridge.
So I had a client of mine. We were very successful together. I was a new manager, so early in my career. And then she, moved up in her organization just as I moved up in mine. 15 years later, I get a call from her, and she said, "My son is applying for a job at the university. Can you talk with him?" Well, first of all, it's like we had not stopped talking to each other in 15 years. And it's like,
Yeah.
of course I'll talk to him. And the funny thing is, I knew her son when he was 5 years old. And I'm
Yeah.
picturing this little 5-year-old blonde headed kid who's now an attorney.
Yeah.
And then I talked to them and I said, higher ed, everyone talks to each other. So all the attorneys in higher ed talk to each other. My Google contract came from Berkeley. So, we go learn about that association of university attorneys, look at all the issues they're dealing with. And he got the job.
Yeah.
It's just,
That's great. That's a good point too, is like the kids that you meet now are going to grow up and have jobs. I mean, like you could have met him when he was your attorney, and
that's, r-
you needed him to treat you well as attorney you were.
that's right. That's
So
right.
yeah, you really do. You never know where people are gonna circle back around. I mean, I got the job that I have now because I was trying to sell something to the company I work for now
Mm-hmm.
and found out that I knew somebody there from when I was a kid, from when I was about 12.
Wow.
And I reconnected with that person. That sales meeting went nowhere. But 3 months later, when they were launching a new training program, I was fresh enough in that person's mind that they reached out and said, "Would you be interested in a job here?"
Mm.
And, that was 16 years ago now. So
Wow.
yeah,
That's great.
you never know.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I wanted to circle back on, and this might be selfish question, but I just see this happen all the time. It happens especially with salespeople, I feel like, who are out networking all the time. But I think it can happen elsewhere too, because you gave the advice, always try to be helpful to somebody else, right? You got to care about what's important to them and help them achieve their goals. I've sat down with people, and I'm sure you have too, where like the first words out of somebody's mouth are, "How can I help you?"
Mm-hmm.
And it always feels like cliche or disingenuous to lead with that. It's like, I don't even know if I want you to help me. Like, we don't know each other yet. So how do you advise people to approach that helpfulness in a way that is really authentic?
Well, it's good old fashioned doing your homework. Don't walk into a potential customer and not understand what their organization mission is, what their vision is, where they hope to be in 5 years, what their values are. A lot of it's on a website. But I would have vendors come meet with me if they didn't even bother reading my homepage. With,
Yeah.
here are the values. Here are the projects we're working on. We were very transparent with all that.
Yeah.
And a way to demonstrate you care is doing your homework.
Yeah. Back to being intentional, right? Where you started this whole conversation.
Right. And let's say executive leadership, you never know when you'll get that opportunity, but you need to, as you're growing in your career, understand where your organization, what is the mission? What is the purpose?
Yeah.
And then what is the vision? Where do they want to be 5 years from now? And then what are those values? internalize that and try to walk the walk. I worked with one customer who needed a strategy. It was a large university system, so 14 different campuses, and they had no IT strategy. And these are billion-dollar organizations, multi-billion-dollar organizations. And so we went to all the campuses, talked to all the leadership, talked to faculty, staff, et cetera. And the number one issue was the network was terrible. And in the rural part of the state, they're swinging lanterns to get the network. And number two is we talked to the librarians. The industry was killing them with these subscriptions and kind of playing them off each other. And so the number one strategy was triple the capacity of the network. The number two strategy that was unanimously endorsed was we need a digital library. Well, now that we have a network that can handle it, we can have all those digital assets in one place and be accessible to 250,000 people in this statewide. About 15 years later, I'm at the University of Texas at Austin, and they're talking about the digital library and how nice it was to be at home in your bunny slippers and being able to do research without coming to campus. So,
yeah,
I think it's helping people articulate where do they need to move. And I always enjoyed the strategy part, because if you have a strategy, then you know where you're going. A dirty little secret is a lot of organizations don't have a strategy.
Yeah.
And we had a new leader come in. First thing he says, I'm going to do a strategy. 5 years went by with no strategy. It's like, you said you were going to do it.
Yeah.
His successor came in and knocked out a strategy in a year. Everyone knows where they're going.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. I feel like the secret of the professional world is everybody's just doing the best they can all the time. And nobody has it figured out. And the amount of ineptitude is the wrong word, but just the amount of like stuff that needs to be figured out. It's amazing how industry works in these billion-dollar business. Just like the whole economy is just people trying to figure stuff out. That's like the big secret,
Yep.
There are two terms I want to hit before we wrap up here, just because I think they're interesting. What is dog fooding?
Dog fooding is a term that Google uses, and it's trying out the new service on your staff before you open it up to customers.
Eating your own dog food.
Yeah, that's right. And so an example would be we were going to roll out a new cloud-based email system. Well, I had 330 people in central IT use it first before we unleashed it on the customers. However, we made a mistake. So it doesn't always work. We kind of rushed through dog fooding. And once we started opening up to a much more heterogeneous customer base, there were problems. And the tool didn't work so well with the Apple computers. Well, we had a lot of Apple computers. So we actually halted the rollout and kind of went back to, let's fix these problems, more dog fooding.
Yeah.
And then once we rolled it out the second time, it was not flawless, really.
Then it was good. Okay.
Yeah.
What about power mapping?
Power mapping is something that I learned to do at the firm, where you take an organization chart and you circle the obvious places of power, but they're often people who are influencers, like the chief of staff at that large university. So you circle their box on the org chart, and you're really trying to intentionally identify where the power is, whether they're influencers or in the hierarchy.
Got it. Just to map out both
The obvious.
The obvious and the subtle power
Yeah.
dynamics within an
That's
organization.
right.
Got it. Got it. Well, Brad, this has been a really fun conversation. I think the concept of building a network is, I mean, it's so relevant to everybody, and everybody struggles to do, well, not everybody, but most people struggle to do it. It is a learned skill, like you talked about.
Right.
Any final thoughts to people here about the concept of building a network that maybe you didn't share already?
Well, I'll go back to that professor. Get out of the office and tell people you care.
Yeah. There you go, people. You heard it here first. If you would like to check out Brad's book, Spheres of Influence, How to Create and Nurture Authentic Business Relationships, you can find that in the show notes, along with anything else that we talked about here and links to reach out to Brad. Get out of your office, go meet people. Good luck out there. And thank you, Brad, for coming on the show.
You bet.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.